So we are going to start. I hope all of you can see it. Biography of Frederick Engels. He was born in 1820 and he died in 1895. Just like Marx, he was also, um, Prussian. He was also born in Prussia, and he was a German philosopher, right? And they became very good friends. So in the last class, we discussed about the trajectory which, Marx's life took. This class, we are going to understand Engels, because if you don't understand both of them, you're not going to understand Marxism. That is the first thing. The second thing is that how do you pronounce his name? How do you pronounce it? There are two pronunciations. One is Frederick, right? Frederick Engels, and the other is Frederick Engels. So which is comfortable for you. How do you write it? You write it as simple as fried rich. So that is how you remember the spelling. It's fried rich. I don't want to make it mean anything though. Okay. So here, this is the book, The Frock-Coated Communist, The Revolutionary Life of Frederick Engels, written by Tristram Hunt, is the book which has been till now, I have found, as one of the most close and in-depth scrutiny of the life of Frederick Engels. To the detail that it goes. Along with the detail that it goes, it also goes into the giving you the information about the context in which he was born. So if they're talking about male suffrage in England, they'll give you the context about it. If they're talking about Peterloo massacre, they'll give you the context about it. So this book is basically, if you really want to study and buy, I would recommend that you go ahead and buy this book. And the language is very simple. So anyone can understand it, and this is a very good book. So we come to understanding Frederick Engels. What was he? Like when you think about Karl Marx, you can understand him as a historian or a philosopher who did his degree in law. So it was Dr. Karl Marx, right? So what was Frederick? What was his occupation? How will you define what occupation he had, right? So he was a materialist. Now, when I was teaching you about Hegel, I told you that there are two kinds of thought. One is idealistic and the other is materialistic. The thought process is when you understand that everything that exists is an idea in your mind and you accordingly try to create it and define what things are and question your existence. When you're talking about materialism, you go to the very basic of socio-economic character of your society. You talk about matter or things that exist in themselves, right? And how are they having an impact on you, on your mind, and everything else. So he was a materialist and he was a scientific socialist. So what is scientific socialism? Scientific means empirical in this way, and socialism and communism, whatever it is in detail, we are going to talk about in the next classes. But in short, it is the abolishing of the private property. So there was a arrest warrant which was, against him when he was involved in 1849. There was a coup in Prussia against the monarchy, and Frederick was involved in that coup. And he was involved in that coup. There was an arrest warrant which was launched against him. And in that arrest warrant, there were a couple of things which were written about him, or the color of his eyes, hair, eyebrow, all of that. But the two very interesting things in this arrest warrant was that he speaks very rapidly. बहुत जल्दी बोलता है, right? And the second thing that was mentioned is that he's short-sighted. मतलब myopic है, चश्मा. So he was 6 feet tall, or he was very tall. In few biographies, it is said that he is 5'6". In few biographies, it is mentioned that he is very tall. So I don't know, but let us imagine that he is very tall. He is called as a frock-coated Victorian cotton lord. So I don't know how many of you have read Harry Potter. So you have the Dark Lord and all this fascination. Then you have Lord of the Rings. So Lord is a very fascinating mystical subject, right, in fiction literature. Frock-coated because the dress that he's wearing during the Victorian, so men had a different kind of attire, which was like a skirt kind of frock. So that's why it is a frock-coated, and Victorian because he was born during the Victorian era. Cotton, why? Because he had cotton textile mills. So he was the owner of cotton textile mills. We'll go into the detail of it. He spoke a lot of languages. The spelling of language over there is wrong. He spoke a lot of languages like Russian, Italian, Portuguese, Irish, Spanish, Polish, French, English. Milanese also. Now, Milanese is what? You know, Milan, which is the fashion hub in Italy, where you had during the pandemic of COVID, Milan was one of the hotspots in Italy. So the language which was spoken in Milan at that point of time, because when he was born, there was nothing called as Italy as per se. So the language of Milan was something which he also knew. So he knew a lot of languages. He was a polyglot. What was his longevity? Longevity is the time frame of your lifespan. So he was born on 28th of November on 1820 and he died on 5th of August 1895. So in fact, his father's name was also Frederick Angel Sr. So what happened is that when he was born and his mother was there, so the moment he was born, his father was, who was an like, you know, he was a Protestant Christian. He was like, oh Lord, you know, we are very happy to have a healthy little boy and we'll make him religious and all of that, which will never be. But this is how he was welcomed in his household. Um, so giving you the context, Hegel, Karl Marx was 2 years elder. So Karl Marx he was born 2 years later. Engels was 2 years younger than Karl Marx, but he will live for 12 years more. Marx will die early. When Hegel died in 1831, Engels was 11 years old, right? When Ricardo died in 1823, Engels was 3 years old. Why am I? You don't have to really contextualize about Ricardo, but with Hegel, yes, because Hegel was the mentor. In spite of not being the real life mentor, Hegel was still the mentor of both Marx and Engels, right? Hegel died in 1831. He never met Marx, he never met Engels, he never taught both of them, but his idea lived in both of them. And this is how he looked when he was young. And we go ahead and we start talking about the place where he lived. So he was born in Barmen, which was in Prussia, and now it is a part of Germany, right? His father's name was Frederick Angels Sr. His mother's name, as you can see, is Elizabeth Elise Franziska Mauritia von Hahn. So it is very long to call her Elise. Now, Elise, in the biography of Frederick Angels, the character of Elise is known for two things. One, for being the mother of Frederick Angels, and the second is that Elise's father, so Angels ke Nana, like his grandfather, was always very sick. So most of the times Elise was basically taking care of her father and she was absent during the growing years. Not all the time, but she was here and there, both the places. What was the occupation? Now understand, in this place called as Barman, Frederick's grandfather had come over. They were hardcore Protestant Christians. They came to this beautiful place, which you can see. It is called as Barman. Today, like in 2020, you'll call this as Wuppertal. The name has changed and Wuppertal has become the city structure. But initially, at that point of time, Barman. What they did was, this was an agricultural area. Here, plants and everything, subsistence farming used to take place. So when his grandfather came over here, they started with the industrialization or having factories and mills. And what did they used to produce? They used to produce the silk ribbons. In Barmen, they used to produce silk ribbons. Now imagine how his life was. Barmen was like an industrial village. Industrial revolution is about to take place. They have started making, cotton or textile, whatever. And during that time there was no factory set up as such, so where did people have their workshops in? They used to have their workshop in their house. There was no concept of factory. So then what happened was that when they started having this kind of culture of barmen and industrialization and the villages and everything, when Frederick was growing in a way in which, like if his house is here in the middle, then his uncle's house is in the front, then his aunt's house is just next door. So the entire family was staying together and the workers were also staying just nearby. And it was a very cordial society. They had a very cordial society, and his grandfather used to make sure that everyone who is working in the factory is taken care of. Everyone has their, a life, and they get salaries, and they have a good cultural life and everything. And he also founded this Barmen United Protestant Church. So remember that Prussia was what? It was a Protestant Christian religious state, right? And in that, Frederick's grandfather founded this church. So imagine that what was the impact of religion. They were very hardcore religion centric. In fact, they were pietist. So what is pietism in Christianity? Pietism is that when you believe, along with the fact that you have the church and everything else, you also believe that you can have a direct uh, rendezvous with God through having sermons or through having this companionship of other people who pray. And that is much more. And when you're a pietist, you are showing your 100% reverence. You're showing your 100% reverence to the Almighty, to God, without even questioning it. Right. So they were pietist also in terms of Protestant Christianity. They were hardcore pietist. Now, what started happening was that after his grandfather died, just like any other business family, as soon as the grandfather dies, there's this batwara or the issue between the brothers that we are going to have a fight and everything else. So now, what Frederick's father, who is Frederick Angel Senior, what he does is that, okay, I am going to start with my own now. I don't want anything of my family, and I'm going to have my own factory here, and I'm going to have one factory in Manchester, which is in UK. So he gets a factory in partnership with two Dutch brothers, and he starts his own factory over there. But he diversifies better. He goes into not only into making ribbons and all of that, he goes into hardcore textile industry, which is what? He goes into dyeing, production, making of threads, and everything else. He goes into all that. So he diversifies by himself. Now, they also, during that time, because we know that UK was, why did it choose UK? Why did it choose UK? Why not Germany, or why not just any other European? Germany did not exist in that geographical sense. But why UK? Because UK was where the Industrial Revolution took place. Now, if you think about Gandhi's charkha, or the spinning wheel, what happened in the Industrial Revolution in UK is that they created a mechanical spinning wheel kind of thing, in which you don't need human interference. So UK also, apart from steam engine and all that discovery during the industrialization, UK also was getting more, going higher in terms of having these discoveries in textile and any other resource. Uh, Now, understand, at that point of time, when Frederick's father was becoming this pioneer of everything, there were two industrial centers. One was Manchester, and the other was Barmen. And his father had control of all of them. So I'm talking about Frederick Angels. When he's born, with a silver spoon. In fact, he's born with a golden spoon, right? And he doesn't have any kind of like any kind of deprivation of any sort. He's not even in the place that he's living, in the industrial village of Barmen where he's living. There's no idea of deprivation, because the entire structure of this family has taken care of the entire workforce over there. So he hasn't seen poverty. He hasn't seen, what is deprivation, what is exploitation. But I would want you to look at the picture which is just below the picture of Barman which I've put. That is a painting, as you can understand. And I'm showing that the skies are pink. I hope you guys can see. I'm showing that the skies are pink. Why the skies are pink, we are going to come, later into the category of it. But remember that when I'm showing Barman, I'm showing sky which is reddish pink in color, and then I'm showing chimneys and pollution and all of that. Remember this. His father is very, so we discussed about Karl Marx, that what kind of relationship did he have with his father. So Karl Marx was, as we remember, was loved a lot by his father. In fact, his father homeschooled him, and his father taught him about Immanuel Kant and Voltaire and all of that. And his father himself had converted from Judaism to Protestant Christianity to be a lawyer instead of being a rabbi. So here, in the case of angels, you'll see that he has a very complicated relationship with his father. Very, very complicated. His father half the time is not able to, he's very dissatisfied because his father is a hardcore industrialist and he's not able to, he wants his son also to be a industrialist. He wants all of this to happen, very naturally, but he's not able to understand angels. And I think to a certain degree you can say that he's not able to domesticate angels. And when he wants his wife Elise to be there and to domesticate him and to teach him about God and the presence of God and importance of God, uh, Elise is half the time with her father because her father is very sick. So he is getting very frustrated in the upbringing of angels. Also, there is no intellectual component. He is an industrial. His father is an industrial giant. He doesn't have this academic or intellectual thought process. He's not part of any secret society. He's very much in reverence with the Prussian state. So he wants his son also to be like that. He wants his son to go ahead and, enlarge his own property and all of that, both in Prussia and in Manchester. And he's not able to control angels. And this is a certain kind of thing which will come on and on. They both, like the father son, they have this complicated relationship which is after, you'll see in the coming age that how it is coming out very in a very toxic manner, which was not there between Marx and his father, right? Understand that we are talking about angels. Angels is 2 years younger than Karl Marx. So look at this beautiful photo, right? So what happens is this, that when Angels is 13 years of age, he's taken into a gymnasium, grammar school, and he studies over there, right? Uh, when he's 17 years of age, he is actually forced by his father that come out of this. You're not going to waste your time, in the school. I want you to be the next person who will take away my, empire. And you're not going to study. You're not going to do anything. You're just going to, go ahead and study about industrialization, go ahead and study about capitalism, go ahead and study about how we can have licensing, export, how do we understand the bureaucratic bookkeeping of our industry, which is cotton textile industry or cotton mill. And that's it. And suddenly Angels was like, he was having a good time, an intellectual academic time in his school, to whatever degree as a kid he is capable of understanding. And suddenly his father comes over and says that you need to come and we need to go to London. So he takes his son to London, where to understand, in London, he goes to show him that how you buy raw, because remember they were in the ribbon making, silk ribbon making business, and then he diversified and everything. So he takes him to London to teach him how to buy raw silk, how to understand what is the scrutiny. Then he takes him to Manchester to teach him about the silk sales. And basically in his father's mind it was that Angels will grow up and eventually he'll take over the UK side of our factory. Then he forced him that you go to this place called as Bremen, right? He forced Angels to go ahead to a place called as Bremen in 1838. And this is a certain kind of a, like a manufacturing city where he's taught about what is industrialization, what is capitalism, and he's taught about all this. He has to take care of the factory over there. And he's playing a double life. So one thing which always happened with Angels was that he had this double life, that one life which was dictated by his father, the other life which he himself was going ahead with. So when he went to Bremen, he started reading Hegel. So this is the time when, you know, uh, Angels is reading about Hegel and he's like, oh my God. And then he's learning so many languages, which I told you about. He's learning horse riding, he's learning dancing. So what the biographers always say, that when you think about Marx, you think about someone who is always very dismissive and depressed and lonely and thinking about the higher questions of life and socioeconomic relationships and everything. And then just the opposite, you have angels who is full of life and always in a happy mood, and he'll make you happy. He's talking about so many things and everything. So that is the kind of opposition that you have between Marx and angels. What was Marx doing when he was 17, 18 years old? When Marx was 17, 18 years old, remember that his father has said that, okay, go ahead, you should, don't go into conscription. He was also going to University of Berlin, and he also got secretly engaged with the sweetheart of his life. And what is Angels doing when he's 17, 18? He's studying about Hegel, he's learning horse riding, he's dancing, he's learning squad fighting also. And there are many accounts in which Angels is talking about, like if he has to, if he's having a duel with someone, so he'll go away and slap that person and be very happy that, look, this is what I did. So Angels was always very full of life, right? And he started living and creating a life for itself. How will you, in this map, how will you figure out what is the distance between where he was born and where he was studying? So he was born in the place today which is called as Wuppertal. Wuppertal is around 2 hours 56 minutes away from Bremen, where he was studying about Hegel, horse riding, and taking care of his factory. Right? So this is the difference. This is a journey which was there between hometown and the place. Both of them are in Germany. Today is Germany. Both of them are in Prussia. But I'm just telling you that how far he was from his home. Right? So this here you can see that Angels is young, right? He also used to do this drooling, like, he's doodling actually. So making caricature and illustration and all of that is there. So when he was there in Bremen, he started writing a poem. He wrote a poem about Beduin. Now, what is a Beduin? So in normal nomenclature, Beduin is a nomadic Arab. But here and they are brown in color like us or even darker. So when he was talking or writing about this poem about Beduin, he was talking about slavery. And he was writing so many articles to all the newspapers which were there at that point of time, but he never used to use his real name. Just like Marx never used to, often in London, he never used to use his real name. In the same way, Angels never used his real name. He always used the pseudonym of Frederick Oswald. So look at the tension over here. That one part of him wants to let the world know that, look, it is me. I am the guy who is writing this poetry, even though it is not very good or whatever, but I'm writing it. And on the other hand, he's using the title not of his own, like not using the title Angels, because then that means that you're following your father's family structure name. So he has a part of him which wants to tell the world that, look, I'm, so rebellious, I'm not very much as an industrialist as my father. And there's another part which is also very shy and scared of the world. So he's talking about Beduins, and how he's talking about that after industrial revolution they have slaves and they are performing for pennies, like they have to work for very little amount of money, and they're also working in theater and all of that. So he's talking about all of that. This poem was not very mature. It was like, okay, theek hai, ho gaya, poem, right? So that is why he starts thinking that, okay, look, I can write in my pseudonym and I can write a lot of poems and everything, and no one will come to know about it. So why don't I go ahead and write about serious issues? And he's in Bremen. He's away from his family. In fact, there are, in the autobiography, it is also mentioned how, like he, in the family with which he stays in Bremen, they used to have these fights with flour, atta. So एक दूसरे के ऊपर आटा फेंक रहे हैं type से, and they are having a very good time and they are, laughing. And he used to make a lot of people laugh over there. So then in 1809, someone needs to mute their mic. Everyone, please check if your mics are muted. Yeah. So in 1839, he wrote for the Telegraph. And through these lines, you will understand the change of his personality and how serious he becomes. He writes that this new economic reality was re-elected in the growing usage of terms like pauperism and proletariat by journalists and social commentators in referring to the kinds of rootless, propertyless, casual urban workers who lacked regular employment and security. Right? Mark Twain had written a very famous story, Prince and the Pauper, right? From where the term of being a pauper comes. Pauper means what? A beggar, right? And before the term proletariat comes, there's this the term pauper is still in the nomenclature or currency. Who are paupers? Paupers don't your homeless beggars or your daily contract laborers or your migrants. They don't have their own property. They work on contract. They are casual. They are not part of regular employment. They are part of the informal economy and they don't have this security. So, the first thing that Angel starts thinking about and looking around himself and saying is this that what kind of structure are we living in, right? And he calls them as paupers. Then eventually the term proletariat will come. But he's talking about this very structure of informal or contractual economy which has emerged, right? One thing which you have to know about Angels is that he was one of those young boys. Like when there's this imagination that when girls grow, they play with Barbie dolls, right? So, in the same stereotypical imagination, it was Angels who was always fascinated by knights and swords and kings and horse riding. That is why he learned it also. Sword fighting also he learned. So Angels was always mesmerized by that. So when he turned 18, he was not like Karl Marx that, okay, I'll have a weak chest. But eventually Angels will have throat cancer and he'll die. But the thing is that at this point of time, he's like, okay, I want to be in the Prussian army. And Prussian military is the strongest military over there in Europe at that point of time. And he's posted for 1 year. He takes the military conscription, and for 1 year, he's posted in Berlin. And he enrolls in the University of Berlin also side by side uh, along with the conscription. He's also in University of Berlin, and there he is meeting these young Hegelians. Who are these young Hegelians? We'll talk about. But imagine, like, he's growing up, and at that point of time, he is very much fascinated by knighthood. Why? Maybe because the Prussian imagination, like a boy growing up wanting to be in the army and fighting for his country. So, a patriotic imagination like that, and he always wanted. So, he did not leave the idea of conscription, which is mandatory military training that you have to go through. And he goes ahead and does it in Berlin, which is a great. You can see the Prussian army wearing this blue coat. So, he used to really like this blue coat. Like the British used to wear red coat. So they were called as red coats. Here, Prussian army had this blue coat. Now, what happened in Berlin University? This is very interesting. It's like he's making fun of his, like most of the students do. So he's making fun of his teachers. How is he making fun? So when I was teaching about Hegel, I told you about that Hegel had two very good friends when he was in university. One was Fichte and the other was Schelling. And over the period of time when Hegel became very famous and he started countering the assumptions of Schelling, who you can see here was a very good friend of Hegel, they became enemies and they became different. Like they lost touch and had a fallout. So Hegel dies in 1831, but Schelling will die in 1854. And just like Hegel, Schelling is also teaching in University of Berlin. So every time a class of philosophy will start or theology will start, Schelling will keep on abusing Hegel. Like he's talking very anti-Hegelian. And he's irrespective of the fact that Hegel is dead. Come on, give the dead a break. But Schelling is continuously talking about Hegel and abusing and criticizing the philosophy of Hegel. And the student in the class is Frederick Engels, who loves Hegel. So just understand the chutzpah of this statement. Two old friends of younger days, right? He's talking about Hegel and Schelling when they were roommates, when they were young. He says that two old friends of younger age, roommates at Tübingen Theological Seminary. They both were studying in the seminary, studying about religion, right? Now 40 days have passed. After 40 years of meeting each other, so sorry, 40 years have passed since they were roommates and they grew and whatever. And again, face to face, they are as opponents. They have become enemies of each other. One of them is, so he's talking about Hegel, and look at how students are, like how they make fun. That one of them is dead, but he's alive in his pupils. So he's talking about that one of them is dead, Hegel is dead, he's alive in his students, and look at the other. Like, he's abusing his own professor. He's like, look at the other. Intellectually, he's dead. Intellectually, he has been dead for a very long time. And now he's suddenly wanting himself to have full power and authority over his students. So every time Schelling used to say something against Hegel, Frederick Engels used to start with his poetry of making fun of his own professor because he was much more of a Hegel follower than Schelling's follower. Now we come to this concept of young Hegelians. And this is the most important aspect. Why is it important? Because I told you that both and Marx will meet young Hegelians and they'll become this young Hegelians or left Hegelians. So what was this idea of young Hegelians? And he's in University of Berlin. So what is happening? On one hand, he's meeting a philosopher called as Bruno Bauer. Now, you will understand that not every philosopher of that time in Prussia is very famous, because you need to have the archiving and someone to tell about them, their manuscripts and all of that, right? So Bruno was one of the philosophers who was very famous at that point of time, but now he has been forgotten. One of the reasons also he was quite infamous was because Marx used to write a lot against him. One of the ways in which, like Karl Marx, basically when he was the editor of a newspaper and so many other newspapers, he used to write a lot against Bruno Bar. So Bruno and Marx were very against each other. You will ask me, and I'll tell you later. The second, so Bruno is someone who Engels meets in University of Berlin. On the right, you will see Ludwig Feuerbach, right? Ludwig was a student of University of Berlin 10-15 years back, but his book actually was released during this time, like in 1840s, when Engels was in University of Berlin. His book on Christianity was released at that point of time. And at one particular moment in time, because the book was so deep and the structure of this writing was so real, that everyone felt as if they had become Feuerbach themselves, right? But before you understand who was Bruno or who was Feuerbach, we have to understand that what is the structure of study at that point of time. So I'll tell you something which you don't know about being a PhD now. In Prussia, which I told you in the previous classes, that this factory model of education, this model of education where students are like raw goods which are processed in universities and schools, and they have this homogeneous quality about them, and after their production they are thrown into the capitalistic industry and marketplace. This idea, which is even true right now, the factory model that we are producing mechanically, we are producing the same kind of students, right? This very idea of education started with the Industrial Revolution, and one of the hot spots of this kind of education was Prussia. Prussia was very famous for two things. One was military, The Prussian military was very, very strong. That is why Napoleon was, he the Battle of Waterloo. The second thing which Prussia was very famous for is education. So you won't believe initially what was happening in medieval Europe. I told you that economics as a subject was launched only after 1776 when Adam Smith wrote the book Wealth of Nations. So what kind of subjects were existing before? Like subjects like media, subjects like sociology, geography. These subjects did not exist at that point of time. So what existed? At that point of time, there were four kinds of subjects in which you can study if you want to be a student. I'm talking about medieval Europe. One is Faculty of Arts. So you have Faculty of Arts also in DU and everywhere. Faculty of Arts was one particular stream, which included philosophy and everything else. Second was Faculty of Law. Third was Faculty of Theology. And fourth was Faculty of Medicine. These are the four subjects which were there in medieval Europe at that point of time. What was theology? Theology was the subject which, if, for example, today, if you want to crack UPSC, you have many subjects that you can take your optionals as. You can take political science, BABAD, you can take any subject for your sociology for your optional, and then you have CSAT, whatever the structure of UPSC is. But imagine if I tell you that theology, which is the study of God, so only a subject which is the state religion of India, becomes the subject through which you can crack UPSC. That was the case in Prussia. So if you want to go and become a civil servant in Prussia, if you want to have the structure of IAS or UPSC, which whatever the alternative would be there at that point, you have to study in the faculty of theology. As simple as that. You have to study religion. And theology was a department of the state. So state used to choose that who is going to study about theology, who is going to teach about theology. If you study theology and you get very good marks and you perform very well, you can get into the public office. You can become a civil servant. You cannot become a civil servant if you're studying law, medicine, or anything else. So you understand theology was very important. Hegel was a theologian, right? Bohr was, we'll go back to him, was a theologian. Feuerbach, theologian. All the young Hegelians were talking about theology. That was the subject of their bachelor's and master's and PhD. So what was happening at that point of time? So I'm talking somewhere around 17th, 18th century, even 19th century. You had a structure in which you had Bachelor of Arts. So you see, faculty of students will the first degree that they go ahead and get is Bachelor of Arts. And after that, they will get this degree of Master of Arts. Understand, this is the origin of your BA, MA term. So Master of Arts. Prussia was doing this, but at the same time, they decided that there has to be a subject like PhD, which is the Doctorate of Philosophy, which will be given to students of Faculty of Arts. And this was similar to something called something equivalent to masters. So what started happening was that, say, imagine if you're studying in America, you're one of the students in America, you have done your bachelor's, and now you want to do PhD. So you go to Prussia and you enroll into their just after the bachelor's, you enroll into their PhD program and you get a PhD. So which was the kingdom, which was the empire which started giving PhDs for the first time? It was Prussia. And it was from there that Yale University was the first university in US which started giving PhDs in 1861. But then America changed it. They gave the structure of BA, MA, and then DPhil, Doctorate of Philosophy. Right. So now so why I want you to know this, apart from you knowing the structure, that where the idea of MA and BA comes from, I want you to know about it also is because, to give you the example that why theology was the end all and be all of Prussia. Theology was the be all and end all of Prussia. That is it. आप खुद भी सोचेंगे कि आप कभी किसी मेडिकल को PhD नहीं देते हो. Like if you're studying doctor, you don't give PhD degree. If you're studying law, you don't give PhD degree. PhD degree is always given in the arts background, right? So, but the title doctor will be there with the physiological doctor. This is the structure of it. Prussia is the controller of this kind of education, and Prussia is giving you the idea that, okay, go ahead. Once you get the PhD, your name is doctor, like Karl Marx was doctor, or Feuerbach will become doctor. Is this that you can now go ahead and start teaching? Also, there was something called as license or licentiate, which was given. For example, in India, if you want to teach, you need a NET degree. And it is not necessary that you have a PhD, but NET is mandatory at least. In the same way, in Prussia at that point of time, there was this license which was needed to start teaching also. So what Prussia was doing is it was creating the strong connection between theology and arts. Imagine in India the kind of importance that we give to science and maths. In Prussia, the same kind of importance was given to theology or the study of religion, because it was a Christian Protestant state. They wanted everyone about it, right? And only then you can become something big, someone big. Now, so everyone who is, so Marx was not a student of theology, he was a student of law. Even though his PhD that he submitted in University of Vienna was on philosophy. But he was, if you look at the nomenclature, what was he student of? He was a student of law, right? He was not a student of theology. So when you come to this entire importance of theology, here you come to young Hegelians. So what were young Hegelians? The basic understanding of young Hegelians is that when Hegel died, there was this friction over the term Geist. The conservative or older Hegelians believed that Geist was God, and the younger Hegelians believed that what they were trying to give more importance to ideas of Geist being socio-economic reality of life. We were discussing about this entire concept of young Hegelians. So there were two streams of thought that started. One was the elder or the older Hegelians, and the other was young Hegelians. See, both of them, if you have to be a young Hegelian, you have to be a student of theology in Prussia, right? That is the necessity. If you are a student of theology, only then you can be even a young Hegelian, because that is your subject. For example, if you, a lot of students who are from social science background, they become activists. You will see less of science students getting into it, right? So because why? Because in social studies, you're talking about ideas, philosophers, and then you get the interpretation or the inspiration to question the society. But you don't have, it's much more about natural sciences, right? So what Marx had a problem of with both of them, with the elder and the young Hegelians. What Karl Marx had the problem of, and he was very clear from the very beginning that he was not very pally with the young Hegelians. The problem that he had was that he did not believe that religion in any form was causing any kind of emancipation. So why should a subject like theology stay? Why should a subject like theology stay? Is as simple as that. He was like, we'll come later to the debate about, you know, if God is existing or Christ existed, or is it just a myth, or is it just an idea, or what a Geist is. Why are you still a student of theology? He believed that a real young Hegelian was someone not a student of theology, who was not basically believing in this religious indoctrination, right? So young Hegelians didn't like Marx. And Angels had just joined University of Berlin, and he's enjoying over time and becoming friends with Bohr and others. And he's like, I'm a young Hegelian. That's so cool, right? So we have to understand at that point of level. So when, you know, because if you, Angels used to love writing these letters, right, to newspapers. And he will write a letter to the newspaper, which is, the editor is Karl Marx. and he's very excited, and then the other young Hegelians will come over and tell him that we don't like Karl Marx, right? So there's this distance, there's this friction which is there. So now we are going to start again with yeah, okay. So I hope all of you can, we are back to where the electricity cut happened. So what happened here is that young Hegelians were what Bruno was. Now, why is Bruno controversial? Bruno is controversial because initially in the beginning he was old Hegelian, or he was elderly, like, right-wing Hegelian. Then he became left-wing, and then eventually he again became right-wing. So half of the time people were like, he doesn't know what he is. And in his defense, Bruno always used to go ahead and say that, look, I'm not left or right, I'm Hegelian. Your ideas of left and right are not this kind of, boxes that can tie me up in. So understand both sides of the debate. So he basically started questioning if Christ existed or Christ was an imagination. This was one question that he started thinking about. It's in the same way that did Prophet Muhammad, did Ram exist? Did Krishna exist? Your answer is that, okay, we have Quran, we have Bhagavad Gita, but what if it is a only cultural construction created by someone, and you have this going on and on and on, generation after generation, but there's no truth to it? You will never see Prophet Muhammad, you will never see Krishna, you will never see Ram, you'll never see Christ, Moses. Why are you believing in their reality if it is not empirical? You understand? So he started saying that Christianity is the biggest problem in the development of self-conscious freedom. What is the biggest problem? Christianity. Why? Because remember when I was talking to you about Russian dolls, you are one doll, the smaller one, an individual. An individual is inside the family. The family is inside the state. And the state is inside the Geist. Right? So now what started happening was that he said that, look at Hegel. Hegel had given very clear category that India, China, they are lost in themselves. They are stuck in time. Hegel gave this idea. He had written a lot about India also. But he said that Prussia is the only state where, the Prussian religion is the closest to Geist, which is the Protestant Christianity. To this, Bruno said that, listen, this is a cultural construct. And then he said that Jesus was a fusion of Jewish, Greek, and Roman theology, and he didn't really exist. So imagine that he is there in University of Berlin, and eventually he'll start even teaching, and then the Prussian state will fire him from University of Berlin, and they will say that, get lost. How can you question Jesus, right? So this was someone has to mute themselves. Yeah. So this is something which happened. Then what is this what is Feuerbach famous for? Feuerbach's book came. He was not a part of this circle of friends that angels had made in Berlin University, but his book had released at that point of time. So what is Feuerbach saying? He's saying, man, this is a secret of religion. Projects his essence into objectivity and then makes himself an object of this projected image of himself, that is thus converted into a subject. What does it mean? It simply means that when imagine that what he's saying is that this bottle is God. I'm the subject and this is the object. As simple as that. When I myself have created this object, which is right, and I have given him so much of power, so much of, a reality which is subjective in itself, because I have made this object a subject, which means that if I am looking into this object, if the object is a living being, the object is also looking at me, right? So for this particular, so imagine if there's another human being. Imagine if there's another human being in front of me. For that human being, that human being is a subject and I'm the object, right? And for me, I'm the subject and the other human being I'm looking at is the object. Now, what is Feuerbach basically saying? That I have created this God, which is an object, but at the same time, it is in a subject. And when I create this God, I create this power dynamics in which the God is stronger than me. I have boundaries. I can't start flying. I can't vanish. I have boundaries. Fire a bullet at me, I will die. I will suddenly not become invisible, right? But God is not controlled by these limitations of body, life, movement, mobility, existence. So he's saying that the entire Geist is an interpretation of the human mind. And you have given so much of importance to the Geist, which you call Christianity or Christian God or the Holy Spirit or whatever. You have given so much of importance, you are alienating yourself from it. The moment you say that God exists outside of you, what are you saying? That you are not part of God. God is something which is external to you. So you are weaker, you are less powerful, if in case we're talking about power, and you are having a lot of limitations which God is not having. So you yourself have created this enemy, which is not enemy, sorry. You yourself have created this certain kind of, this mirage, which is God, which is external to you. And you have alienated yourself from something that you yourself have created. So this idea of alienation, let us understand what it means again. It means that I have created God. God is a subject in his own reality because God is what? A human being? You're saying Christ is a human being, right? Now, this God or Christ or any other kind of, so we are talking only about Protestant Christianity. So what is happening is he is more powerful, he is divine, he can resurrect, right? You are outside of God. He is not part of you. You have alienated yourself from something which you yourself created. Imagine whatever is life around you in this time and space, you are able to feel it, that yes, there's a pandemic going on, or yes, there's this problem or that problem. I'm having a headache, I'm having this, I'm having that. But if you're dead, problem, no, you will not feel it because that reality is over. So, in the same way, he is saying that God is something which doesn't exist naturally. Human mind has created the idea of God and Gaius, and it is, very metaphysical also. But at the same time, this idea, when you're creating something which is more powerful, the moment you say that this person is better than me, you're creating this hierarchy in which you are lesser. So imagine in the hierarchy with God, where are you? And then you also create this entire ideology where you can't live without the idea of religion. So what are they both doing? What are these young Hegelians doing? They are questioning Geist, right? They are not believing that Geist is Christ or Geist is Christian God or Geist is anything religion, but at the same time they are using the language of theology, right? So this is what Marx had a problem with. But right now, Angels does not understand it. Right now, what he really liked Feuerbach of, that, okay, this idea of alienation. This idea of alienation is so strong. The moment you believe, and this is true, the moment you believe in a God which is outside of you, you are alienating your own reality. Right? Because you don't believe that God, you are a part of God. Right? So this subject object debate is what he was talking about. Now we come to the free and the free ones. So there's this, like when you join university, you have this gang with friends and you go drinking and club and pubbing. So Angels was full of life. So this is one picture or illustration that he himself has drawn. He made this friend society called as the ones who are free, the ones who are studying theology, but we are free, right? Young Hegelians. So this basically group was created in 19th century in Berlin, the students of University of Berlin. So there was Bruno, there was Edgar, there was Angels and many others. And they used to go out and, go to pubs, and they're drinking and clubs and all of that, and having duels, and you can see the picture of it. This is a very, very famous picture, right? So this is what, and Angels does not care about. He has not met Karl Marx. His own friends have said that, listen, we don't have to follow Karl Marx, and he's talking about something which is communism and socialism. We don't want to. He's taking us away from theology, irrespective of the fact that the young Hegelians were radical themselves, right? So what is Angels doing when he's there in Berlin University? Because he really likes writing letters and articles with the pseudonym. He starts writing for Rheinische Zeitung, which is the German 19th century paper that Karl Marx was the editor of. And Karl Marx, and this is in Prussia only. Karl Marx has done his PhD, and he has become this editor of this Prussian newspaper, which is writing against the Prussian government, and then it will be shut down. And Angels is also like, yes, I'm also going to write articles and everything. But there's one, irrespective of the fact that he had a very difficult relationship with his father. In University of Berlin, remember, even Marx started having distance with his family in University of Berlin. What happens with Angels is that, read this quotation, he starts having this feeling of alienation, very strong. He's not able to connect with the idea of God. Questions like, if God exists, then why God is not able to show me he exists? Empirical mind, right? I pray daily. This is how he starts. I pray daily. He's writing to a friend of his who believes in God. He's writing to a friend of his that I pray daily, the whole day, for truth. I have done so ever since I began to have doubts, because obviously he's talking with young Hegelians and Feuerbach and all of that. But I still cannot return to your faith. He's trying to say that, my friend, I cannot come back to that kind of Christian Protestant faith that you have. I don't have it. My eyes ill with tears, like they have a lot of tears, every time I think about God and when I'm writing to you about it. To be sure, you lie comfortably in your faith as in a warm bed. When you talk about God, when you think about God, it is comfortable. You know that God is there to protect you. And you know nothing of the ghost, or nothing of the, basically this is not exactly English, it is a translation, so there are differences in the words. You know nothing of the pain that we as human beings have to put up to, whether, because half the time we are questioning God is existing or God is not existing. You do not know the weight of the burden one feels with one's own self, the burden of belief, when one must decide for or against whether to go on carrying this idea of belief in God or to shake it off. And it happens with all of us, especially in our tough times, right? When you want to, you're praying, you're believing in God and everything else, but the more you travel, the more you explore, the more you grow, you start doubting also, because there is science which is teaching you that everything is what? Empirical and factual. So how can you believe in a God which doesn't exist? Or if God does exist, how do you know about the existence? Right. So he is having a very, very difficult time. And you can see that Angels is not someone who suddenly gets up one day and says that, no, there's no God. It is a process. And it happens. The more liberal you are, the easier for you it is to. If you are much more conservative and you are not thinking, but you're reverence like a pietist. In pietist Christian theology, you don't have to think about if God is existing or not. And Angels is coming from that family background. Right. So it is a very difficult time for him. It is his entire childhood, his own identity, his existence has gone away with. Imagine if something has been taught to you from the very day you're born, and then you start questioning it. Your world is changing, right? So he is starting to have very difficult relationship with his father, with his family. He's not very religious. He doesn't go to church. He doesn't pray. He's having a tough time. So his father comes again, and his father sends him off to Manchester, that go get out of University of Berlin, go to Manchester. Now here again, look at Manchester in this painting. One thing which is very common, which I told you from the first painting also, from where Angels was born, are the red trees. Right? You see, this is also in Manchester. It is a certain kind of metaphor, a certain kind of symbol these red skies. It talks about the pollution, it talks about the death, it talks about the poverty. It is a symbol of industrial revolution which destroyed, nature. You see so many chimneys, so many factories, pollution is there, the sky is foggy, it is not clear, it is not blue. It looks very raw and doesn't old school, but not very clean. Environment is suffering because of industrialization. More factories, more pollution, more poverty. And I told you that in Manchester at that point of time, when he goes in 1842, in Manchester, the average lifespan of a person is 28 years. Right? 28 years. There's massive poverty. People are living in very dirty conditions. Very dirty conditions. In slums like you have in Dharavi. So that is what Manchester has, but it is also the industrial capital. So look at the juxtaposition. That on one hand you have massive poverty, on the other hand you have factory and mills which are making a lot of money. And you will see it in Delhi itself if you go to the mall at Vasant Kunj. Just next to it is a Ran Basera, right? So this juxtaposition that you have where so much of poverty and just in opposition to it you have mills and factories. So what starts happening over there? The first thing which starts happening over there is this, that when he goes to Manchester, remember that his father had this alliance with two Dutch brothers. And that is why the name of the factory is called as Victoria Mill, because giving homage to the Queen. But the office is of Erman and Engels. So Engels is Engels' father, and Erman is the Dutch brothers, the title of the Dutch brothers. Now they are not very happy with seeing Engels coming. So they keep him at a very clerical position. This was the import, this is the export, keep writing diary, bookkeeping. They don't let him go up. And what he started seeing was that he was seeing that the pollution level in Manchester was so high that people started, you'll go out of the streets and you'll start crying, something which is very similar in Delhi pollution. You can't see anything very clearly. It is all, there's so much of smog, there's so much of fog, it's very dirty, you can't breathe properly. So that was a situation which was happening in Manchester at that point of time. And Angels was like, suddenly he was like, what is this happening? He also goes ahead and he falls in love with Mary Burns, which I told you about in the last class also. Mary Burns was an Irish, she was an Irish lady who was working in the factory of Angels. And then there's this another theory that she was into orange selling of oranges, which was prostitution. So both of them are debatable. We don't know because there's no archiving done of her. There's no photo, there's nothing. But when he falls in love with her, now understand that Angels has a weakness for women, especially expensive women. So he was one of those who would pay for women expensive. So that was his natural trait. But he meets Mary Burns, he falls in love, and Mary Burns, because she's a factory worker, she takes him around by hand, and she shows him the reality of Manchester and how much poverty people are living and dying. That is one thing that changed his life. He starts also feeling very strongly for her, and because there's no trade union, there's no working rights, people are working for 14 to 16 hours in a day. So say example, now you want to go to UK, if you get a visa, or you want to go to US, in any kind of visa that you get, it is mentioned that how many hours of work or internship it is allowed. You can do only that. If you go ahead and do anything else, it is illegal. Why? Because the working rights are mentioned very clearly now. But at that point of time in 1840s, there was no trade union, there was no working rights. People were working for 14 to 16 hours. They were not getting even half the salary which they deserved, because there were machines now and factories. Many people, and that was the luckier ones. The unluckier ones were getting fired and not having job. There was a lot of homelessness. In fact, in one of the books I read, that in Manchester at that point of time you could see disfigured people disfigured people that they have fought, and they have fought against the police over there or the government, and they have been injured, and they are walking with that injury because they can't afford any kind of treatment. So it is that is the history. So next time when you support Manchester United, you should know the history of Manchester and support it more, right? So what happened is that his relationship with Mary Burns went on for 20 years, and then he will fall in love with with her sister Lizzie. We'll come to that. But she basically, they never marry. He was against the idea of marriage. For angels, it believed that the husband is always the bourgeois and the wife is the proletariat. And monogamy is a kind of slavery which is very strongly related to private property. We'll talk with that, but the family structure as an institution he did not adhere to. He also came to know about this Peterloo massacre. So remember Peterloo massacre, in which Napoleon was, he lost the Waterloo massacre, and Prussia, Austria, England, all of them, they won it. So there was this huge respect for military officials. So what was happening in England at that point of time is that not everyone could vote. In UK at that point of time, not everyone could vote. Only few of them could vote, only 11% of the population. So I'm talking about that the people normally who could vote were white men with property, but not all white men with property, only 11% of them. So in 1819, there was this it was something called as similar to Jallianwala Bagh over there in 1819. So what was it? The similar thing will happen in India 100 years later, but what was the exact thing? What happened was that people in Manchester, they started to go on a protest, like 700 to 800 people, no, 60,000, 70,000 people, they came out on a protest at St. Peter's Square, which was a square which was, the place of protest. They came over, and then the British red coats came, the military troop came, and these people were fighting for working rights, more salary, more voting rights, and all of that. And the military came over and killed them. So around 600 were injured, and many died. 72, 75 died. So it is considered, why is it called as a Peterloo massacre? It is a sarcasm that look at Waterloo massacre, where we won. We defeated this despot, Napoleon Bonaparte. The military was held in high reverence. And just in contradiction, after 3-4 years, in St. Peter's Square in Manchester, the same military is coming against their own people. Right. So this is what Peterloo massacre had also left a very lasting negative impression on the lives of people in Manchester. So this is something also, like, after he comes in 1840s and he comes to know, Angels comes to know about it, and all of that happens. So he's very disturbed, and because he has his way of catharsis, his way of dealing with it is to write. So for the first time, under his own name, imagine, his father was frustrated and took him out of Berlin University and sent him to Manchester, that now my son will not do anything radical. And now in 1843, Angels is like, now I'm going to write a book on my name, right? And he wrote the first economic work which he wrote, which was Outline of a Critique of Political Economy. And this must be in German, right? Now, what is political economy? What is the difference between political economy and economy? Economy, as I told you, started in 1776 by Adam Smith when he wrote the book Wealth of Nations, Critique in the Nature of Causes of Wealth of Nations, right? Political economy is the economy or part of economy which is formulated dealing with public policy. So the politics of it. Through public policy, you are able to change the economy. So that is political economy. So conditions of working class specifically, which really disturbed Angels, was the exploitation of child labor. Child labor was rampant, right? It is said that third world countries have a lot of child labor, but look at that point of time. Child labor was rampant. So it is said that there's this quotation which says that there's no idleness amongst us. The child workers come at 5 o'clock in the morning every day, right? They have half an hour for breakfast. In the evening, they'll have half an hour for dinner, and then they leave. So from o'clock till 6 o'clock, more than 10, 12 hours, they are continuously working in the factory. This was the extent of child labor. And when that shift is over, then at the night time, another shift of child laborers will come. These are homeless kids. These are, very poor kids who have to work, because who is going to take care of them? And there's no trade union to work for workers' right and to prohibit the fact that you can't make it is illegal to make children work, right? So, but this is not a new concept. If you during your childhood years, if you would have studied Charles Dickens and his books, if you haven't, and if you can, I would say that you should buy these books and read it, because fiction often is the right way of telling you the reality sometimes more than non-fiction. So Charles Dickens was also, the very famous Victorian writer. He himself was a child laborer. His father was imprisoned because his father was not able to pay his debt. So Charles Dickens also worked in a factory. And in Oliver Twist and David Copperfield, the two books that he wrote many books. These are the two main books in which he talks about child labor and exploitation. He talks about how, in Oliver Twist, like how Oliver is basically joining the gang of criminals later. And David Copperfield is considered to be a, real life analogy of Charles Dickens. So through that fiction, these were not imaginations that they were talking about. Children were being exploited a lot because of industrialization, right? So this is one thing which disturbed Angels. Angels also started apart from young Hegelians. So he's pubbing free there, the free ones, that group that he had with Bruno and others. He started distancing, because he was like, in University of Berlin, we were talking about theories, ideas, having a good life, debating, testing each other's knowledge, like you do in a university. University is a safe space, right? But when he came out to the real world and he saw the poverty around himself, when he saw the socio-economic problems around himself, he was completely baffled. And he said that what in university we had no idea that life could be so painful. And why are we debating about the highest? Why are we studying theology? Why are we discussing all of that? We have to discuss the exploitation that industrialization has created, irrespective of the fact that he was also a mill owner. Right. But at that time, the Erman brothers had kept him at a clerical level. So he was also very, like, what is this? Now, in 1842, for once, like story that he writes a letter to the German Prussian newspaper, which Karl Marx is the editor of. And they briskly meet and they don't like each other. They meet and they don't really like each other. And also because at that point of time, he had heard very negative things about Karl Marx and everything. So didn't really make an effect. When he wrote in 1844 the book about the working class in England, and he goes to Paris, he's going to Prussia, and he stops at Paris. And at that point of time, remember that Karl Marx has been asked to get out of Prussia, so he goes to France. And at that point of time, they meet in this very beautiful restaurant. So, Café de la Régence, or in French, it will be Café de la Région. So in that, basically, they meet and they start talking with each other, and then Marx realized that, okay, this guy has changed and he has written this book, and working class and a lot of empirical data, because he started staying in Manchester, he's interviewing, he's doing a lot of sampling, he's able to give a lot of data. And for Marx, it is like, okay, so they met on 28th of August 1844, and that is when they became very good friends, right? In 1845, they will write the first book together, which is The Holy Family, the critique of the critical critique. So that is why now Marx and Engels are against the young Hegelians. They're against Bohr, they're against Feuerbach, they're against many others. And they talk about something called as materialism, which is the economic reality of a man. They have shifted from being an idealist to a materialist, right? And in this book, very famous quotation is that a war has been declared against those of the German philosophers who refuse to draw from their mere theories practical inferences, and who contend that man has nothing to do but to speculate about metaphysical. It was a kind of sarcasm. It was, and the Holy Family is also a sarcastic, it's an abuse, it's a sarcastic term which they are using on the left aliens, that why are you talking about metaphysics, why are you talking about theology, why can't you just focus on the socio-economic realities which are disturbing the human race and exploiting it, right? So this is how Holy Family is written. Then they also join the League of Just, which I told you will later become the Communist League, and the manifesto that they'll write for that political party is the Communist Manifesto. And now he's expelled, Marx, because again he's writing against the Prussian government and writing against monarchy. So France is also monarchy. He's thrown out of France. Then he goes to Brussels in Belgium. And then Engels also joins him. Engels gets out of Manchester and comes to Brussels, and they write on ideology. Now, what are they talking about German ideology in? They're talking about that the social structures are the product of your economic and technological forces. So the kind of world that you live, the flat in which you're staying, or the family, whatever flat your family is able to afford, the school that you're able to go, the university that you're able to afford, the dresses that you wear, the meal that you take, the things that you're able to buy, the things you're not able to buy, everything is a result of the product of economic and technological forces, right? Here technology, they don't mean data science. Technology here is factory and machines and all of that. They say that as the world has progressed, there have been changes in the stages of production. So initially there was primitive communism, when humans were hunter gatherers. There was no idea of money or concept of money or private property. We were hunters and gatherers, the early man. So that was the first stage, which was called as primitive communism. He wants to go back to that stage, right? Primitive communism. And then the early man changed it into classical slavery. You had slavery, then you had feudalism, and then you had industrial capitalism. And according to them, after industrial capitalism, you will have the protest against the revolution by the proletariat against the bourgeois. Then you will have socialism, and then you will have the utopia, which is communism. These are the stages that will happen. So what are these? These are forms of intercourse in society and nothing else. And the property system, the culture of the social class, the political forms, religion, cultural movement, all of that keeps on changing with every stage. Why is all of that happening? Why are there so many protests happening for Black Lives Matter? Why are there so many protests against Wall Street, against the monarchy, or the military regimes of West Asian countries? Protest against corruption in India. Why are these things happening? Because you're living in this entire structure of economic and technological cage, which is controlling your life. And that is what they talk about. One thing which I'd clarify, for the idea that the working class is going to protest against the bourgeois is the idea that was given by Engels. Because when Marx was writing, studying, and taking notes in the British Museum and writing, the person who was actually involved as an activist in the revolutions in 1848 and other places was Engels. He was actually a revolutionary, right? So you see this juxtaposition, that Marx is an intellectual, ivory tower intellectual, right? He's staying in his own way, writing about the reality, writing very deeply about the reality, right? Thinking about it, formulating it. And the person who was acting on it was Engels. Now what happens is, from 1845 to 1848, they go to Belgium. Now understand, Belgium was formed in 1830. So ekdam naya naya tha. They went in 1845, right? So Belgium was a newly independent state. It got its independence from Netherlands. and it was a liberal constitution. Jaise Prussia was a monarchy, France was a monarchy, Belgium was not a monarchy in that sense. It was like liberal in terms of constitutional network. But remember, Marx को warning मिली थी that you are not going to write anything against our state also, which he will obviously go ahead and do against it. But उसको warning मिली थी Belgium में भी. Now what happens is the Communist League जो है वो Marx and Engels को commission करता है कि you make a communist manifesto about the demands of the working class. So they do that. It is called as the Communist Manifesto, which I talked to you about. So when Marx is writing about the Communist Manifesto, he's talking about his own, he has done a PhD, he has lived in France. Now, initially he was in Prussia, then France, now he has come to Belgium. Engels has seen the worst side of poverty of Manchester, which is haunting him. So these are the two contexts that are working when they're writing Communist Manifesto. The practical data, field trip, sampling, all of that Engels has done, and he has lived with the subject. So he knows what is the intensity of exploitation of the industrial class. And here the very famous quotation comes that let the ruling classes tremble at the communistic revolution. There will be a revolution. The proletariat have nothing to lose but their chains. We all are in chains of what? The structure of society, socio-economic, technological chains we are always in. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries unite. Right? This is a very famous quotation from Communist Manifesto. And when Communist Manifesto was printed, Frederick Engels' family goes mad. Right? They go mad because they're like, they start pleading him. His mother goes into a nervous breakdown. She's like, what are you doing? This is against God. You're not believing in God. You're bringing bad name and reputation to our family. You're a black sheep. You're an ugly duckling, whatever. And his father has completely stopped talking with him. And they are also trying, like his mother is constantly telling him that leave all of this. Leave Belgium. Leave Europe. Go to America. But nothing is. I'm trying to give you this idea because to have you understand the American fascination which was there. Because in 1840, Marx also wants to go and settle in Texas, right? So it would have been a good thing, but that is there. Now, what happens in 1848? There are revolutions in Europe. Suddenly in 1848, there are revolutions, and Marx and Engels, they become very excited that, yes, this is the revolution of, we have written the Communist Manifesto, people have read it, they are revolting, we have caused the revolution. And, I'm just trying to trivialize it to make you understand, but they had just, like written this manifesto, and they were very happy that, there's this revolution happening. It started from France, and then this went on for a year. So what was this revolution about? There were many things that was happening. One, there was a pandemic going on. So the relationship between pandemic plus like cholera and all of that, the relationship between pandemic and protest is nothing new. The second thing that was happening at that point of time was also that there was this migration because of factories, machines. The people from the rural areas were shifting to urban areas. There was limited land. People were not able to get enough money. There was no trade union. There was no workers' right. They were not living good lives. They were being exploited. Whatever was happening in Manchester was also happening in other parts of Europe where there were industrial units. So people were fighting against it. They also wanted that the monarchies which are, controlling them, the idea of a nation started coming. And the idea that, we need to have a country, we need to have a president, we don't need a king and queen or whatever. This idea, it started because of two reasons. First, 1789 French revolutions eventually led to Napoleon Bonaparte, who also wanted again to be an emperor. Right. So what was the point of going for a revolution if you want just the same facade? Right. The second thing was also that American independence has taken place. America has something called a president. What is a president? We want that. We want a structure. We want something similar. The idea of nation also started getting very concrete. But this protest or revolution will not go on for more than a year. Which really depressed both Marx and Engels. because they were expecting that the entire structure of, private property and money and currency and social classes and all of that will be removed. But this didn't happen. And Prussian army came over, British army came over, all of them started crushing the revolters. So your pen is not mightier than the sword, because the army will just come and kill you, right? You keep writing. The point here is that there were some good things that happened also. One was that the absolute monarchy in Denmark was over. Then there was representative democracy in Netherlands, which was, the empire was over. So there were a few good things also started happening. You see the definitions of state coming now, right? Of democratic states. But the revolution of the working class didn't happen. And it was very depressing for Karl Marx and Engels to see this 1 year revolution not become, very prominent, because they were expecting that once we have written Communist Manifesto, we have the Communist League, we have started talking about all these workers' rights, they are going to have a protest, all maximum people are exploited and in pain because of industrialization, but it didn't happen, right? So never in the life of Karl Marx will he ever see a revolution which is, the Bolshevik revolution happens in 1917. Though the interesting thing is that they predicted it. They had predicted that in 1917 there would be a revolution by the peasant class against the Tsarist Russia. And you'll have something as the Soviet Union. There'll be a different kind of structure. That's something Marx had predicted. But in his own lifetime, he never saw any kind of revolution as such. Now, our Engels was involved in 1848 revolution. He was there in Belgium and he was like, I'll fight with the revolutionaries. Then in Prussia in 1849, there was a coup. And when there was a coup, then he was also involved in that coup against the Prussian monarchy. And then he was found out and then arrest warrant was issued against him. And then his family came over, and because the family had connection, Engels was asked to get out of Europe and go to London. And by the channel of the ocean, he comes to the Thames River and then London, and he goes to Manchester, and then he starts working again as a clerk. So imagine when he was a teenage in the mill, Victoria Mill in Manchester, he was working as a, and then again now he's working as a clerk because of a punishment that you were involved in a revolution against our own monarchy. We are letting you live, go to England, but you won't be the owner or partner. But by 1864, he keeps working, and he becomes a main partner. He stays in Manchester. The interesting thing is that he's always under constant police surveillance when he's there. So he has official homes, he has unofficial homes, and his relationship with Mary and then later with Lizzie, all of that is very ambiguous. That's why you don't get a lot of data of. Also, just like Adam Smith, who was having this entire issue that no, burn my books, whichever I'm writing, burn my manuscripts. There were 1,500 letters that Marx had written to Engels and vice versa. They used to write letters every day. Every day they used to write letters to each other. There were 1,500 of such letters that after the death of Karl Marx, that is why we don't have a lot of archiving also. Now, Marx at that point of time was, living in London in extreme poverty. I told you about the poverty conditions of he and his wife, Jenny, and the problems that they suffered. This idea, this very famous idea that history repeats itself, once as tragedy, secondly as farce, is the idea that Engels gave to Marx, right? So the idea of alienation, which they'll get from Feuerbach and they'll use in historical materialism, is also through because Engels had read that book in 1841. The idea that the working class is going to fight against the bourgeois, again, Engels had given the idea that family and, monogamy and state institution, family institution, we should not, it is a certain kind of bourgeois proletariat relationship or slavery. Engels gave that idea. And again, this idea of history, because what was his Geist was also history, right? So this socio-economic changes causing the history, it's repeating as tragedy and farce, is again the idea of Engels. In 1853, what happened was they had imagined the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, I laughed because of two interesting things. The first interesting thing is that when they went there, then the book like Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital, it was published in, like published later in Russia. It was because the Russians thought at that point of time, the Tsarists, they thought that, okay, this is completely scientific, no one is going to read it. And there's a man there called Lenin who's going to read it and he's going to cause the revolution. So imagine how, you never know about life. The second thing is that in Soviet Union, especially, irrespective of the fact that what Stalin did and the dictatorship and everything which he did, a lot of statues of Marx and angels and all of that were decapitated and they were like thrown away because people started hating communism. But it was always, in prisons and in other, in prison, if someone is in prison in Soviet Union, they would get the tattoo or stamp of Marx and Engels and Lenin. And the reason was not because they were having reverence or they followed. The reason was this, that in any part of your body, if there's a tattoo of Marx, Engels, Lenin, because they have been the founders of Soviet Union, so the Soviet Union army or military or police is not going to hit you there because it will be blasphemy. So that that is one funny thing which used to happen. Now coming to Lizzie. So what was the story of Lizzie? Now Angels lived for 20 years with Mary. Mary dies of a heart stroke, or I don't know exactly what the reason is. They never marry. In the same house, in the same house, Angels then starts living with Lizzie, who is Mary's younger sister. She is also called as Lydia, right? And there's a book which is written recently by called as Mrs. Angels by Gavin McKerra. This book is talking about the life of Lizzie. So if you want to read ahead and go ahead, you can buy this book. Uh, he marries her because just one day before she's dying, she has a disease, and just one day before she dies, she requests Angels that marry me, right? And that is why he married her just like few hours before her death. But what was the idea that Angels always had was monogamy was the first form of the family, not founded on natural but on economic conditions. So when you get married, when you get married, money plays a very strong role in that marriage, in a kind of marriage. Right. I'm not talking only about the wedding. I'm talking about the entire institution and lifespan of marriage. So the victory of private property over primitive and natural collectivism. So in early man, during the time of early human man, and the way they lived in, like hunter gatherers, and they didn't have money, they didn't have private property. There was nothing like this is mine, this is yours. Everything was shared. That was a much more natural state of human life and human relationships. This idea that okay, I have to marry, like he said that even in any religion, the patriarch or the head of the family is allowed to have polygamy, and everyone else has to be happy with one wife. Why? So he was against the entire idea of monogamy, and he was also stating very clearly that this is not very natural, because then when you marry, what is basically marriage according to Angels and Marx was the idea that marriage was nothing else but this entire permission that you're getting to procreate and reproduce and have kids who are going to control over your own property later. So this is your property, you want to safeguard it. How will you safeguard it? By having kids who can continue either retaining that property or enlarging it. So everything in marriage is about private property, right? So that is one thing which happened. Then in 1870, so all this time when he was writing letters to Marx, he was staying in Manchester and Karl Marx was staying in London. You look at the picture at the left side. Here you will see three kids, right? As I told you, Marx had 7 kids, Marx and Jenny, out of which only 3 survived. And on the right side, you will see Eleanor Marx. She is the daughter of Karl Marx, and she is the one person who is giving the archival account of Frederick Angel's life. So a lot of what we know about Frederick Angels is through the lens of Eleanor. When after the death of Karl Marx, there are 2 volumes of Das Kapital, which he will write. And then he dies on 5th of August 1895 at the age of 74 due to throat cancer. And when he dies, he leaves around 2 million plus property value to the two kids of Karl Marx, two daughters of Karl Marx, and he himself doesn't have a kid or whatever. So he gave, like, even after his death, he was helping financially the Marxist family. So this is how we end. Thank you for attending the lecture. There'll be a lot of articles which I'll be tweeting on the Twitter account today, tomorrow, whatever. I do it like 5 times a day. So follow it. If you have any questions, any query, you can always email me. A couple of you have asked me readings on historical materialism and others. I will send it to you. And in case if you want any book, any reading, whatever, you can always get back to me and I'll help you. We are ending the bit of like 5 or 10 minutes break, and then we'll start with the state nation idea, which will again be recorded. So thank you for being here. And yes, we'll take a break now. Thank you.